So I'm all about customer service. I'm all about giving the people what they want. So I'm scheduled for reading. I can read some stuff. I'm bad at it. I'm happy to do it. I've also published 11 novels, written about 30 screenplays, produced about 45 screenplays on 6 seasons of television. If you want to ask me about that stuff, we could do that. Which would you guys prefer? You want reading, or you want Q&A on the state of publishing in America? Reading? Okay. All right, fine. So you guys want the lesser option.
Both and everything.
What's that?
Both.
Okay, fine.
Give the people
Greedy
what they
bastards.
want.
Okay, so I had some choices on what I could read today if I was going to read, if you guys forced me to read. So my writing partner, Daniel Abraham, and I have started a number of new projects, one of which is that we are doing a thing on Patreon called James S. Sikori Writes a Novel. And it is basically, we point cameras at ourselves for every bit of the writing process. So plot breaking, discussion about chapters, we post all the chapters, we talk about revision, we post all the revisions. And so the number one question that both of us get when we're doing things like this is, how does your writing process work? So that thing is literally like you're sitting in the room with us, writing a book with us. So I could read a piece of that. Does that sound okay? Okay, so this is unpublished stuff. Probably, I mean, we're only like 10 chapters into this thing. We probably won't be publishing this thing, if we do publish it, for another 2 years. So this is really early in the process. So if there are errors in this, just remember that none of the editors or copy editors have seen any of this text. So this is pretty raw. Everybody good with that? Okay. And so this book, if you go to the Patreon thing, you'll see us figure out what we wanted to do. And the thing that neither of us had done before was sort of like modern day sci-fi horror. So we decided to do modern day sci-fi horror. So in this book, it begins with a recovering drug addict who one day when she's working in her coffee shop looks out the window and sees an exact twin of herself standing outside looking in at her. And that launches a whole bunch of stuff after that. They get chased by evil Blackwater guys and all kinds of stuff. So this chapter is after the first interaction between evil Blackwater guys and our main character, Josie. And it is from the POV of evil Blackwater guy. So, you guys good with this? Yeah. Okay, all right. Okay, so this is actually chapter 10, so we're pretty deep into this thing. Okay. You sure you don't want something for the pain? The doctor said. She was a small woman, her hair about as gray as it was red. I'm sure, Mike said. Because normally we use a numbing agent, at least for this next part. It's not like anyone's going to think less of you because we used a little lidocaine. I was stupid, and stupid should hurt. The doctor sighed and made a visible effort not to roll her eyes. Very masculine. All right, lay back and look at the ceiling. Mike reclined on the examination table. Waxy paper crinkled under him and his head throbbed at the change in pressure. The doctor walked to stand behind him. She had a little rolling limp, like her hip was going bad on her. She touched his face with her gloved fingertips, prodding and probing, then laid her palms on his cheeks, her thumbs on either side of his nose. All right, she said, on 3. 1, 2, snap. Cartilage and bone crunched. An exquisite pain ran from the bridge of Mike's nose back until it felt like a spike was driving into his skull, and the blood came again. It was thick, dark, and clotted this time, but he could get air through his sinuses. He started to sit up, but she put a hand on his shoulder. In a minute, soldier, she said. We're gonna pack that. Protocol says the packing stays in place for 2 full weeks, so at least try to keep it in for a couple of days before you take it out. Understood, Mike said. The doctor took a roll of gauze down from a cabinet and pulled a stool to sit next to him. I'll try to make this quick. When she was done, she left him with an ice pack to press against his face and instructions to alert the nurse if the gauze bled through or if he felt himself swallowing too much blood. Clot up and we'll let you out of here. Keep bleeding and we'll try repacking. So if he needed a sign about how his day was going, that was it. The exam room had a small mirror on the wall and he considered himself in it. The swelling was bad, but not the worst he'd seen or experienced. The bruising under his eyes was already started. Before it was done, he'd have green and yellow blooming down his cheeks and neck. The real damage showed in his eyes, and it wasn't physical. He was angry. But it was the calm anger. It was the anger that had gotten him out of the military and into private service, that had announced his divorce. It hadn't always been the precursor of change, but sometimes it was. It wasn't rage, it was worse than rage. It was ruthlessness. The urgent care center was painted off-white that leaned toward blue. The tiled floor was aggressively clean and the lights were white, but not harsh. He imagined that it smelled like scented candles and ferns. It was the strip mall version of healthcare. He'd had wounds sewn up in concrete basements that smelled like a slaughterhouse. He'd watched men die trying to hold their intestines in with their hands. That had been emergency medicine. This was condescension with a stethoscope. His hatred of it was the anger too. The junkie girl had gotten the better of him. He was a professional soldier with years of field experience, and a barista with a frequent flyer card for AA had put him in urgent care when he was supposed to put her in the morgue. As he looked at himself in the little mirror, his mind kept going back, touching on the fact over and over from different perspectives, like a trauma victim in a therapist's office, retelling their story in hopes that it would make sense this time. He'd been given the order to kill her, both of her, and she'd gotten away. All right, humiliating, but he'd been humiliated before. So how had it happened? How did he make sure it never happened again? Something came loose in the back of his throat and he walked to the little stainless steel sink. The clot he spat out was black and as wide as his palm. He turned on the tap and rinsed it down. She'd known that it was coming. Not the details, none of them had known that, but she'd sensed the violence in the room when none of the others had. They'd all been eggheading their way to orgasm together, Cruz included. It hadn't come from them. Michael thought about it. It was his own fault. He'd guessed that things had been bad at the farmhouse. It had been in Bacchus' tone of voice as much as the request that Mike make the local law enforcement call. He had driven out to the farmhouse with a sense of combined dread and curiosity. The place had been almost 20 minutes past the city limits, which made a certain kind of sense, given that David Vargas was a research assistant, and not even the lead. One of the things that surprised Mike when he'd gotten into this side of Leo Cruz's empire was how little researchers made. With all the effort of getting a PhD and a postdoc work, he'd always assumed that the people working at science made more than middle management. In reality, the reality was that David Vargas had probably been forced out of White Oak proper by the economic pressure of having a kid. The rural farmhouse had been about the same financial exposure as a half duplex in the city, and with easily 3 times the square footage, and with the nearest neighbor half a mile away. He had pulled up the rutted driveway and parked. The other man was leaning against his own SUV, arms crossed and smoking a cigarette. From that alone, Mike had known that there wasn't any immediate danger, but also that whatever was inside the farmhouse had shaken Baca badly. The blood started on the front porch, boot prints in red that headed out from the house toward the road and vanished in gravel and dust. Mike knew the smell of death and the interior stank of it. The bodies were in the main room, a man, a woman, and a child. The violence that the killers had meted out was as bad as anything Mike had seen. No knife marks, no bullet holes, Baca had said, just teeth. Mike wiped the blood off the dead man's face. He looked like the picture of David Vargas, which made the woman his wife, the child his son. The kid had died hard. He had tried to look at the wounds with the professional's detachment. Yes, bite marks, not blades. Yes, bruising and ripping, but not cutting. The ragged edges of the wounds spoke to a commitment on the killer's part. He felt himself responding to the scene like it was happening to someone else. Disassociating was part of his toolkit, and usually he had more control over it. They had all died hard, and whoever had done it had walked out the front door and into the world. Locals, Baca had asked, and before Mike could decide, his phone rang. Professor Farragut with the news that Josie Ayari was on his way to the office. Both of the Josies. He'd gone to the meeting with the images of the dead kids still in his mind and the smell of their bodies still in his nostrils. If anyone had asked, he'd have said he was fine, but something about the murders had set the back of his head into a raw place, a dark place. Something about the viciousness, the glee in the violence, and Josie had picked up on it. The others hadn't. To them, he was just another body in the room. If the junkie hadn't been there, everything would have gone very differently. It would have been simple. That was the thing with violence. People who hadn't trained themselves to it hesitated when it arrived unexpectedly. That moment of, is this really happening, was usually enough that it had already happened. But the girl had been on the hair trigger of her own, and she'd gotten lucky. He looked at the guy in the mirror. He shouldn't have been shaken. If he'd known what he was getting into, he wouldn't have been. Dead kids were dead kids. Murder was murder. He'd been through it all before. Well, not the other worlds and boundary waves and that shit, but the real stuff, the part that mattered. If he'd known what to expect, he wouldn't have suffered the operational equivalent of a jump scare, and he wouldn't have given off the subliminal threat that the junkie had cued in on. The women would be dead, his nose would be whole, and the face looking back at him would seem a lot less angry. The light shifted as Baca and Cyrilia stepped into the room. If they'd been the same men that they'd been when the plane touched down, there would have been jokes about Mike's injuries, but there were no jokes. Baca handed over a clean t-shirt and a camel sweater that still had the creases from where it had been folded in the shop. Security footage is all cleaned up, Baca said as Mike stripped off the blood-soaked shirt, and the local security is placated. No trouble coming there. Mike nodded once. He noticed that Baca had shifted from calling the locals law enforcement to security. He looked at Cyrilia. Al Khalil and Holt both deny any contact with the subjects. And you believe them, Mike asked as he pulled the t-shirt on. He sounded like he had a bad cold and he was careful to stretch the shirt's neck hole so it wouldn't touch his nose. I do. And Sutton? A beta's on Sutton, Baca said. He missed his last 2 check-ins. Mike's chin went up. There was plenty of reasons to miss a routine check-in. If calling in would compromise his work, he'd push for the next window. 2 missed checks in a row wasn't all that alarming. Under more traditional circumstances, Mike's greatest worry would be that a beta had gotten crosswise with local security and was cooling his heels in a lockup somewhere, waiting for the chance to call the lawyers. If it hadn't been for the corpses of the Vargas family, he wouldn't have felt much trepidation at all. The doctor stepped in, then seemed to register the tension in the room. Her gaze clicked to Baca and Cyrilia, and then back to Mike. Her air of disapproval wasn't gone, but it was buried under a few layers of caution that hadn't been there before. Is the pack holding, she said. Mike pressed his fingertips to his upper lip. They didn't come away bloody. I think so. I'd like to order a CAT scan. If the broken nose is masking other damage, I appreciate that, but that's not going to happen. I have to leave now. Cyrilia shifted his weight, and the doctor's eyes went wide. Is that a gun? You can't have guns in here. My mistake, Cyrilia said, as Mike pulled this on the sweater. I forgot I had that. I'll leave immediately. He's licensed, Mike said. We all are. You still can't have them, the doctor said, but all 3 were in the hallway heading for the exit. She followed, half trotting despite her limp. Keep icing that, and you should avoid heavy exertion until it's healed up. Understood, Mike said, without looking back. Thank you so much for your assistance. The parking lot was half full. A thin man was helping an old woman with a nasal cannula totter in toward the urgent care. Baca held the door open for them until they passed. Mike waited until the civilians were out of earshot. We have 2 targets, both of them going by Josephina Yari and matching her description. Resolving that situation is our first priority. The other 2 men nodded as calmly as if he hadn't just told them to commit murder. In the distance, a siren wailed. Mike pushed back the urge to blow his nose. There was no way he was waiting 2 full weeks to take the packing out. Baca, you take the parents' house. Cyrilia, you take the garage apartment. Once you have eyes on them, alert the rest of us. If you see a shot, take it, but if you're not sure, wait until we can coordinate. Understood, Cyrilia said. A beta? Baca asked. I'm heading for the Sutton place. I'll let you know what I find. There you go. So, like, maybe years from now you can read that. Or you can follow us on Patreon and see as we actually write the damn thing. If you have questions about publishing or writing TV shows or producing TV shows or getting your TV show canceled twice or selling new shows, I can answer questions about those things. There's a guy over here. Am I supposed to just pick my, so there's no like moderator, right? I'm just self-moderating here? Is that what's happening? All right. The gentleman in the mask right here.
I just finished reading the Expanse books finally, and really, really enjoyed how you finished the story that I didn't know where it was going after the TV show. But I was curious, when you started writing those, did you have the whole story arc kind of mapped out and where things were going to go with Duarte? I don't want to give away any spoilers here, but did you have some idea of where things were going to end up and what the climax was going to be?
Yeah, not while we were writing the first book. While we were writing the first book, we were just doing that as a lark. Daniel had asked me if I wanted to write a book with him. I had developed a thing for a video game project that he kind of liked. And so he was like, hey, we should try writing a book. And so we wrote the first book the first book was basically him teaching me how to take my writing skills and turn them into novel writing skills, which are not the same thing. And me teaching about the world I created and that kind of stuff. So it was just for the fun of it. And he was pretty sure we'd be able to sell it to somebody for a few bucks. He called it pizza money. We'd get pizza money out of it. But then we overachieved. And the publisher was like, hey, we would love if you had 3 of these. So then we had to figure out what the next 2 would be, and in the process of figuring out the next 2, we figured out the whole story. So it was in the during the writing of book 2, we actually plotted out all 9 books. And there was a version that was 12 books, but 3 of those books were boring, so we just skipped them. So it was during that second book we sort of figured out where it was all going. And because I had come up with the idea before for something else, I had a vague idea where it was all going, but we really cemented it at that point.
Thank you.
And then there's somebody over here. Sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing with the lights, so forgive me. I'm using the vaguest description of people.
Cool. 2 questions, both regarding the novellas of The Expanse.
Okay.
First question, so how did you both decide what ended up in the novellas? Was it just, hey, there's a plot hole people really want us to fill, not plot hole, but a blank space people want us to fill in? How did you decide what went in the novellas?
Yeah, Daniel and I are both very self-indulgent, so we just wrote whatever thing we kind of felt like writing. So he would go, hey, I've always wanted to write about this guy, and then we'd go, okay, that's about a novella-length idea, let's do that. Or, I'd have an idea, and we'd decide it was novella-length, and we'd write that. So it was never to fill in any particular thing, but the fun thing about the novellas was that they could be things that didn't necessarily advance the plot, which in a novel you're always trying to make sure everything advances the plot, right? Or reveals character, which also advances the plot. So if you're just like, here, I have a cool idea and it doesn't really fit anywhere else, then we go, let's put it on the list of possible novellas. So that's kind of the process that we did. Yeah, sorry, it's not more advanced than that.
The other question was specifically regarding the last novella, Sins of Our Fathers. Was that...
No spoilers.
No spoilers.
Okay.
No spoilers. That's just the title.
Okay.
Was the decision to write that due to the people wondering what happened to the character?
No, it was due to Daniel just really loving unresolved angst. And so he was like, I don't want to give anybody an answer. I just want to extend the angst. So yeah, that one was his. He had been pitching that idea for a long time, so that was not a new thing when we got to that point. Now I'm really wishing I had them give me a chair. Yeah, so it was. He had pitched the idea. He always liked that idea. And then if you've written before, and I assume there are people in this room who are writers, you know that one idea is never enough. You need a second idea, right? So he had been pitching that idea for a while, and then I had another idea, and we came to the realization, oh, we can just jam those 2 ideas together, and now it's a thing. Now it's actually a story.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I can tell that you're shorter than the last person, but that's it.
Yeah, by quite a bit. Not unusual. What's on your reading list right now? The stack of books next to the bed, or the stuff to your Kindle. What are you reading right now that you enjoy?
The problem so people become writers because they enjoy reading. And, nobody, I don't think anybody becomes a writer who didn't spend like their whole childhood and teenage years reading voraciously. And then you become a writer and then you stop having any time to read. So there's a downside, But I mean, recently I think the stuff that I've really enjoyed, I don't know if you guys know a writer named Joe Hill. I'm a huge Joe Hill fan. My love as a youngster was horror. So I don't know if you guys know who Joe Hill is, but I actually think he's better than his dad.
Yes,
So
yes.
I think he's an amazing writer. So I really like his stuff. I wish he produced 7 books a year for me to read. And then recently I just did a big years ago my wife as a present had gotten me every Sandman comic. And so I recently just finished doing a reread of all the Sandman comics. Probably because the Sandman show came out and I was like, I should read the comics again. And Neil, of course, is a god, so it's always awesome to go back through his stuff. So yeah, I think recently that's the most recent stuff.
I'm an aspiring writer.
You know what? Don't bother. Don't bother. The lack of talent radiates off of you like waves. Like waves of suck. I didn't realize it was both possible to suck and blow, and somehow you're doing both right now.
This is all accurate. Nevertheless, can you give me, as an aspiring author, some tips on how you broke into the screenwriting and television, and what someone like me, just starting out,
All right.
can get the
I'll address this to the general audience because I assume there are some people out there with talent. I'm sorry, guys. I should clarify that John and I have been friends for a while, and our shtick is that we make fun of each other. So I don't actually hate John. He's enormously talented. I read his books too. So the reason he asked that question is because the answer is funny, because nobody can replicate the thing I did. So I am absolutely useless as a model to follow, because a friend of mine said, hey, do you want to help me design a video game for a Chinese company? I was like, okay. And then I came up with the bones of what would become the Expanse for that game. That game never happened. And then later, Daniel was looking at the notes for that game and said, hey, do you want to write a book with me? And I was like, okay. And then, I mean, it's the opposite. You know that thing of never go up to a writer and go, I have a great idea, you should write it and we can split the money? Daniel did the other version of that. He's like, you've got a great idea, I'll write it and we'll split the money. That doesn't work. Don't go up to writers and say that. But that's what he said. And then I was like, no, I don't want you to write it. I think you're going to do it wrong. Because I am nothing if not remarkably arrogant. And so we wound up writing all the books together, that's not a model that can be replicated. And then when it comes to writing screenplays, my agent said, hey, these guys want to make a TV show. And I was like, okay. And then they did. And then when they started, the guys who were writing the pilot, because I'm nothing if not remarkably arrogant, I said, hey, you should let me write a screenplay. You should let me write a script for the first season. And they were like, okay. And we wrote a script for the first season, and the producer, Sharon Hall, who's the producer at Alcon, our studio, who actually bought the show, and is Hollywood royalty. She's one of the greats. If you ever get a chance to work with Sharon Hall, definitely do that. She pulled Daniel and I aside, and we expected to be told we were terrible. And she goes, you guys actually can write. This is a pretty good script. And we were like, hey, thanks. And she's like, do you want to write more? And we were like, sure. And then we wound up, from then on, by the season 3, I was sort of acting as the number 2 on the show. I was rewriting other people's scripts. But that's not, I don't think you can replicate that. I mean, the normal path into screenwriting in Hollywood is very different. So I don't think anything I've ever done is useful to anyone else, which I take great pride in.
Hi, I was wondering about that path to the Expanse. Was there also some tabletop gaming in the storyline there? Because I think I remember seeing a comment somewhere from somebody saying, yeah, I played Holden and he was a paladin, so he's going that way. Is that
that was Tom.
Yeah.
So I had designed this thing and it didn't go anywhere. So it turns out that people always have bigger eyes than they have stomachs. So these guys were like, we want an MMO to compete with World of Warcraft. And I was like, here's what it would cost. And they were like, that's way too much. So that was the end of it. They were like, no, we don't want to spend $100 million on a thing. So I just had all this stuff and a lot of gaming friends, and I was like, hey, do you want to try a space game in this setting that I've created? And my friends were like, okay. And so that Tom was the one who created the character role. I think almost everybody who like the game and the book don't resemble each other at all. And this is, if you're planning to turn your game into a book, be aware that they're very different mediums, and that transcribing a role-playing game into a book, it makes a terrible book. And conversely, taking your book and transcribing it into a role-playing game makes it a terrible role-playing game. They're very different ways of telling a story, you can't do the same things. But there are some similarities, and one of them is that there is a character named Holden. Tom played that character, and the thing that Tom always said is, he's like, man, you just nailed Holden's self-righteousness. Because that's how he played him, as very self-righteous. So yeah, in that way they are similar characters. Yeah.
Hi, I'm in between the tall and the not.
Excuse me.
No. You don't want a chair.
No.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah. Sorry, I
That's fine.
got distracted by John.
I mean, that was pretty ninja of him to go from here to there.
Yeah.
It's just like that.
All right.
Okay.
So, person over here.
For those of us who are new fans of these, like I am halfway through the first book, so thank you for the no spoilers thing. Who's Tom?
Who's Tom?
Yeah.
He was the guy who created a character named Holden.
Yeah, but Tom, last name?
I don't know if he wants me giving out his full name in front of
Never
a
mind.
group of people that will.
It's just some guy. It's not like a Hollywood Tom.
No. It's a friend of
It's not
mine.
like Tom Cruise Tom.
No.
Okay.
It's a friend of mine from back in the day.
Never
I
mind.
think I have run role-playing games for famous people. Probably the most famous person to play a character in The Expanse was a guy named George R.R. Martin. But he's the most famous. He's the most famous.
I thought it would be like, John Scalzi.
No, I wouldn't game with John. Talk about a self-righteous character.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you for the reading and for answering questions. I just have a question. I'm wondering, so your series, there's just so much in them. And even just the reading that you did, it was a really great exploration of anger and really detailed kind of gruesome notes. Do you find that when you're writing the stories, you have to cut out more than you write, or do you find that it's a struggle to get to that point where you have so much content?
That's an interesting question. So Daniel and I, this is a process Daniel taught me, so give him credit. We tend to take, we eat the elephant a bite at a time. We never look at what 200,000 words of stuff can we do. We look at what 3,000 words of stuff can we do. And we have sort of a general high level, like single line at each bullet point outline of like, this thing needs to happen and this thing needs to happen. But it's not until we're actually taking that one sentence and saying, all right, what are the 3,000 words of things that make that sentence a full moment? And then he and I hashed it out together at that point. I think once you get good at writing, everything is about trimming what's not needed. So you write a first draft, and we always call our first drafts shitty first drafts. It gives us permission to be bad. You just put some words on a page, and then you check later to see if it's good. So you write a shitty first draft, and the first thing you do, go through and you pull out all the things you don't need. This is a trick I learned in screenwriting that I realized I had already been doing in novel writing, but hadn't put a name to. So when you write a screenplay, one of the first things you want to do is go through it and go, which scenes in the screenplay is the editor immediately just going to cut? Like, so if they're going to cut the scene, don't write it, because then you'll film it and you'll have wasted a bunch of money, because the editor's just going to cut it. And sort of training your internal editor so that as you're going through the stuff you've just written, like, which of these scenes can I just immediately cut and know? If you can cut a scene and no one would notice, nothing would seem to be missing, that's probably not a scene you needed. So after you do your sort of shitty first draft, one of the early processes is going and cutting things out. So that's two answers to your question. One answer is we don't really sort of plot at great detail the whole thing, and when we do the detailed bits, we're always looking for stuff to cut. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
It definitely did.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, I really like the Expanse show. It was fantastic.
Oh, thank
Can
you.
you comment on some of the changes or challenges or differences in making a show for sci-fi and then for Amazon? Because they seem like they have very different sort of incentives and cultures.
They do, but that's on the business side. On the creative side, the biggest difference, people always ask this, and I thank you for asking because it is a common question. The biggest difference between working for network on sci-fi and working for Amazon is we were no longer locked in cement boots into 42.5-minute runtime. Which, you know, is great because sometimes an episode feels natural at 44 minutes. And if you're on sci-fi, you're looking for a minute and a half to cut. And sometimes it's a minute and a half you really would have liked to keep. If you're on Amazon, they don't care. Like if it's, as long as it's around 45 minutes, that's fine. Which was great. And then the other thing is, boy, we could unleash Shoryat Dashlu. So we're just gonna have you cuss up a storm, and she's like, cool, let's do it. Let's do it, baby. In her amazing smoky voice that I'm not even gonna try to replicate. So yeah, then we unleashed the full Avasarala on the world. So those are the two things. Hi.
So just as a person who has trouble giving up control,
yes.
I have a question because I went to a graduate school where almost all of our projects were group projects and we had to work together. And the Expanse is a massive project and you had to work together.
Yes.
How do you feel like you're both represented, and do you feel like at any point you were struggling for control, or did it kind of go seamlessly? How did you figure out how to work together?
No, thank you. That's an interesting question. So I feel like I had an advantage in that my early writing, I mean, before I started writing novels, I had written thousands of pages, but it was all game stuff, right? Most of my ideas got play tested in gaming, and gaming is, collaborative storytelling. It never goes the way you want it to go. You know, you say, you could do this, and your players go, yeah, but what if you did this totally other thing you didn't prepare for? And then you have to do that. So you never feel like you're in control. You can sort of guide, but you're never in control. And if you are totally in control, you're a bad DM and you should stop. The other thing is, once we started writing the novels, it was Daniel and I working together. So again, it was a collaboration. And the thing that he and I will both say is, if you're going to collaborate, you have to accept right from the beginning the final product will not be what you would have done if you worked by yourself. And that is, if you're smart about it, then that's the joy of the thing. Because you're going to see things happen. You're like, oh, I would have never thought of that. That's a great idea. How can I play off of that, right? It's a little more like improv. You know, you guys are all doing improv and stuff on here. The thing they teach is you never say no. You say yes and, right? So when somebody else on stage comes up with an idea, you don't say, no, we're not doing that. You say, oh, yeah, that and this other thing. And if you sort of get in that rhythm in collaborative projects, then it's a lot easier. You're not trying to always drag it back to your thing. And on a TV show, there's hundreds of people in all different departments, and the thing that I feel like I'm fairly good at is writing the words. The thing I'm not good at is designing what a space gun looks like, or what a spaceship looks like, or what a space costume looks like. So what's awesome is there's a professional who does that. And you can go, hey, I need a space gun. And the prop guy goes, what about this? And you're like, that looks amazing. That's way better than I would have done. So you take joy in not having control. You take joy in other people's creativity, and that's what makes it fun. However, having said all of that, my wife also went to grad school, did a lot of group projects, and her report was that they always devolved into she did all the work. And everybody else just kind of rode her coattails and got credit for it. So that can happen. It's harder for that to happen in a TV show, but you know, there are always the coattail riders. But everybody's on the right side. You left side people are really getting dominated by the right side. I just want you to know. Like if I was on the left side, I'd be embarrassed right now by how right side is just running up the score on you right now. I mean, right side is like behind the head, dunking on you guys, you know, just cowering in the corner. All right, anyway.
Hi, I have a gaming question and a Hollywood question, if you don't mind.
Okay.
I've never heard gaming tabletop Grognard. What system did you play?
It was sort of a homebrew. So it started in the open source D20 Future, but I kind of hated all of the Future rules. I thought they were really poorly implemented. So I sort of switched to D20 Modern, the open source D20 Modern, and then just added my own homebrew Future stuff. So those were kind of the two different versions of it. But there is an RPG that's put out by Green Ronin for the Expanse, which uses their age system, which I think is quite good.
I own a copy. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Hollywood question. Could you tell us a little bit about what it was like to learn to produce for Hollywood, sort of beyond the basic writing, kind of interested in your producer journey?
And let me give full credit to a gentleman named Narain Shankar, who was the showrunner of The Expanse. He's been a showrunner in Hollywood for probably coming up on 30-some years now. I mean, he was the guy who was running CSI during the 8 years when it was the most popular show in the history of television. This guy knows his stuff. He's got all the chops. And early on, I just sort of insisted upon myself. I would just follow him around. And I would go, why are you doing that? What does that thing mean? You told him to do this in the meeting. Why did you tell him to do that? But I also made myself available to be helpful. And after a while, he was like, well, you're sort of helpful. Come on, Robin, let's go fight crime. And so I would just follow him around and go to the meetings with him. And afterwards, when nobody else was around, I would ask questions. And then that was in season 1. Then by season 2, he was giving me stuff to do. And then by season 3, I was producing about half the episodes and rewriting other people's scripts and all of that stuff. And it's all because he took the time to explain what he was doing and why he was doing the things he was doing and all of that stuff. So, I took an accelerated learning course by just following a showrunner around and being annoying.
Thank you.
Yeah. See, again, right side. Wow.
It's me again. I was just wondering how much you had to do with the casting choices, because I think they were amazing based on how you wrote, and it's often not like that.
So I was not the showrunner. So the two people who are in charge of casting are ultimately the showrunner is the boss. And then for each episode, the director of that episode has input into, if you're casting somebody specifically for that episode, they have input into who they cast. I was a producer on the show, so I got to watch all the casting tapes, and I got to give my input. So I could talk to Narain and say, I really like that guy, I don't love that guy. And sometimes he would listen. He thought I had a good point, and other times he was like, no, you're wrong. And when I was wrong, he was right, I was wrong. There's a lot of stuff, superficial stuff you go into on your early TV jobs that you quickly realize doesn't matter. That you're like, oh, I like that person because they have this weird physical trait that I think would be great for the character. And he's like, you know what physical traits do? They don't act. Let's hire a good actor. And so, you gradually learn that. But there's a few people. Our Bobby is because I insisted on our Bobby. And Narain went along with it, and he was like, yeah. Because, the thing with Hollywood is, and nobody's deliberately trying to be exclusionary, at least not that they're admitting out loud, but Hollywood casting agents have a Rolodex filled with pretty blonde people. And they have other people too, but 90% of their Rolodex is pretty blonde people. That's who goes to Hollywood and tries to become an actor. And so you go, I need a 6-foot-tall Polynesian woman who looks like she lifts weights. And they go, what about this 6-foot-tall, super skinny blonde girl? And you have to keep going, no, that's not what we wanted. And eventually, and good casting agents eventually learn. They go, oh, okay, we can't just send them whoever's at the top of our list. We have to really dig. And they do that. And I'm not bashing casting agents. But because we were so insistent on some of those things early on, they got much better at giving us the weird, sort of non-standard actors we were looking for. Oh, left side, coming in strong now. All right. This is the beginning of the comeback. Actually, you may be out of time. Game clock might be up. Go ahead.
Are you on Team Earth or Team Mars?
I'm on Team Humans. One of the things that people always ask me is like, which faction do you identify with? And I'm like, the entire point of The Expanse is that factionalism is wrong. and that when you have factions fighting each other, the best option you could get to is everybody stops fighting each other. But we're humans and we're really bad at that. And so people love to pick a team. But I'm not picking it. I like the idea of the independent ship flying around and working for everybody. Yeah. But thank you. A lot of people asked that question, so I'm glad you did.
Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to basically rewrite your story twice and have to change characters slightly to adapt to the television world versus loving certain characters that are now completely different?
Well, you got to remember that they're two different things. I mean, that's a good question. Thank you. They're two different things, and if you try to force one of the two things to be exactly like the other thing, you're doing it wrong because, Daniel really, when we first started writing screenplays, I mean, he's great now, but when we first started, he really struggled to adapt to the medium because the tool set he had developed over many novels didn't work anymore. You can't have interior monologue. You can't, there's no tight POV. Anything that the camera doesn't see shouldn't be in the screenplay. And so finding ways to visually represent things that philosophically are happening in the books means that it's going to be different. So we had, entire chapters in the Expanse books where a character is feeling sad and lonely and they sit drinking all by themselves in their apartment and bemoaning their life. Because you can be inside of their head, that can be a good chapter. That's a terrible episode of television. So you immediately have to go, well, we can't do it that way, so how can we do it? What actions could that person take that show that they're sad and lonely and unhappy with their life by doing things that the camera can actually see? And once you get in that headspace of they're two completely different things, they're similar in the way that like Christopher Nolan Batman and Batman 66 are similar. They both have a Batman, right? But they're not the same thing. And trying to force one to be the other just wrecks them both. And you eventually get into that mindset. This is a different thing. This is a retelling of the story. It's a different continuity. Are we good? Oh, no?
I am 30 pages from the end of the series,
okay.
And I only have one question. How did you decide to name the dog Muskrat? Because it's perfect.
I don't remember, honestly. So here's the thing about writing with a writing partner. So Daniel and I, we write the books together. One of us will do a first draft of a chapter. The other person will do the immediate heavy rewrite of that chapter. And then it bounces back and forth through the process. It bounces back and forth like probably half a dozen more times, constantly being rewritten. So the thing that keeps happening is one of us will think that the other one came up with an idea and go, oh, that was such a good idea, came up, and then the other person will be like, no, that was your idea. You're the one who put that in. So I don't know who named Muskrat. I don't remember. It might have been Daniel. I'll give him credit for it, and I don't know why he picked that name. But yeah, I always like that name too. Yeah.
Okay, so just one last thing. I'm sure you've been asked a million times, and I don't know if it's changed at all, but what are the chances that The Expanse is 100% put to bed for TV, or what are the chances that there's space for...
What are the odds that I'm going to make a big announcement about whether or not the show is continuing here?
Yeah, no, I'm not asking, is it continuing? I'm just saying, like, chances, likelihood, something that you're keeping that you're keeping open, or something that you kind of put.
This is Hollywood. They're out of ideas. Everything gets recycled. Who knows? At some point, somebody can go, you know what we need? We need more Expanse, and we'll go, hey, yeah, we could do that. You never know, and we certainly. Amazon, is our home for 3 seasons, hasn't said no to that. So, so you're waiting by the phone, hoping somebody will call.
So are we.
Are we good? Have we used up your patience? Are you really wishing this hour had been more Rachel Bloom? Because I am. Are we good? Now I'm just going to stand out here waiting for somebody to lead me away. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do now. Thank you.
Where's the stand?